everyone. The panel is a case study in setting up enterprise GRC. But what we're really going to be talking about is the fact that we're setting up enterprise software. So yesterday we talked a little bit about some of the customers and how they're using their GRC system. So for one of the largest banks in the world, the GRC platform, it's the second largest system within that financial institution, second only to the HR system, where employees, there's a compulsory reason to use it, right? Another large financial institution, the GRC platform in size, that's CPU and user base, is second only to the core deposit platform, right? Bigger than the HR system, bigger than the ERP system. So, what we're going to talk about is the challenges of enterprise-wide software and the fact that, it's more than technology, I think a topic that we discussed yesterday, but now we're going to talk about, how those different aspects of enterprise software and its implementation, its feeding, and its prosperity, all have to be carefully managed, right? And we are very privileged to have on stage today the group from Fannie Mae that is really the arms and legs behind all the brain work entailed. And then Marisa Yee is also here from PwC, who has been absolutely instrumental in guiding the work as well as, really trying to plug the holes, as we've gone along with her analysis and insights. So it's really a full team. What we're going to do is dissect how this happens and how ultimately we achieve the goals of enterprise adoption. And so that's, every user, every person within the organization, and also, the benefits that are going to be derived from the system. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask each of you, if you will, to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, but, how did you end up, right, running a GRC program, right? What circuitous route did you take, right?
Great.
And, we'll get into kind of more details about your role as we go through the panel, but I'll start with Nancy.
Great. So I'm GRC Operations is what I do.
Nancy Hall,
GRC Operations. We manage we have a help desk, so I have built that help desk. And then we also, the system administration work is under me. We also do the change management and the data quality. So that all falls under me. Much of my background is with SOX testing, the SOX space, internal audit, heavily focused in technology. And we at Fannie Mae attempted a GRC, a mini GRC years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Never came to be. It ended up being sort of an issue management tool for the technology space. And I was part of that for the SOX program. And so when I heard it was coming back and that we really had this great infrastructure and this new tool, I definitely wanted to be a part of it. So
You sought it out.
I did. I sought it out. I heard about it. I tracked down Peter Bannister, and he let me join his team. So.
Okay. And just a little bit about the help desk. Mm-hmm. So, we talk about different levels of support, but you're that L1, L2,
yes.
They call it support.
Yeah. And we are available
on the line with the users, right?
Fannie Mae's open. We have folks that answer the phone or they answer the emails that come in. We'll go to people's desk. We'll hold training for them. So we're trying to make that as Michael will talk about adoption, as easy as possible.
Okay, great. Michael?
So I've been with the organization for 4 years, actually, and I joined right out of school in the counterparty credit group. So I was there for a little under 2 years when I had the opportunity to join a new team that the organization was putting together called the TIGER team. And it's an acronym, of course, and stands for Totally Integrated Group of Expert Resources. So the purpose of this team was to come together and start building out what our risk framework was going to be. So the processes for how we identify and assess and monitor risk. So I did that for about a year before it turned over into the second version of the TIGER team. And coming out of that, I had the opportunity to join the GRC program full-time. So ended up getting brought in to work on change management and adoption.
Thank you. Okay, great. Lizzie?
Hi, I'm Lizzie Whisman. I am the program manager for RiskWorks. I'm fairly new to Fannie Mae. I've only been with the company for about a year and a half, and previously before that, I was in commercial real estate and brokerage on the tenant side. So RiskWorks and GRC is really all I know when it comes to Fannie Mae. So it's been a great learning experience for me.
Okay, great. Judy?
Hi, I'm Judy Jones. I'm actually the newest team member. I've been there about 8 months now. I do come from a GRC background, though, so while I'm responsible for a lot of the data within the application, I came from GRC growing up through Freddie Mac's restatement from a SOX perspective, and then growing it from SOX to an enterprise-wide GRC capability.
Right, terrific. Margaret?
I'm Margaret Alvey. I'm the product owner for our GRC platform. We have an Agile execution, so I got involved. I've been in internal audit my whole career, and I got involved as the internal audit product owner for that application. And then Peter had the brilliant idea of having someone who would know the platform end to end. And so that's how I came to the team. And I really, partner with our technology team from the requirements gathering to creating user stories, getting them in, UAT, and DevOps, releasing all of that all the way through.
Margaret, can I just add also, you've made the connection to MetricStream and the product management team, right? So, where there are functionality gaps, right, Margaret's taking that on and, saying, when will this be on the roadmap? Or if it's on the roadmap, when will it be delivered, right?
Right. So, prioritizing things, all of that.
Helping us prioritize. So that's really important as well. And then Maris?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Yee. I'm a director in PwC's GRC enablement practice. And I first came to Fannie Mae about 2.5 years ago, and it was supposed to be a 4-month project that I was going to work on. But 2.5 years later, it's been one of the most fantastic places, fantastic clients, and great projects, which I'm excited to talk a little bit more about today.
Great. Okay, thank you. So all of you on the Fannie Mae side report to Peter Bannister, who we talked to yesterday afternoon, who runs the GRC program. The word is RiskWorks, internally, and that's how it's been marketed to all the employees at Fannie Mae. So with that, let's go into a few questions. Nancy, we'll start with you. And you were here speaking with us on a panel last year, but a lot has changed. There's been a lot of maturity in the GRC program. So can you talk a little bit about the accomplishments that have happened this year, how you're measuring them, and do you feel like is it successful, right? Have you achieved what you expected?
Right. So last year when I was sitting here, it was just you and I, and we had Jason from PwC, and we were very much in the build phase, right? So we had just put in PDMS and CASE. We were learning about how to use them, how to support the users. We knew we had a roadmap, but we didn't really know what to expect from it. Since that time, we have implemented issue management, which was massive. It introduced a user base triple the size of what we, I think, initially anticipated. Right. We've opened that up for all our issue management across Fannie Mae, which has been a really tremendous value for what we've seen. Our customers have appreciated. We've been able to implement the reporting off of that. I think Judy will probably talk a little bit more about the reporting benefits we've seen from that, but we've been able to consolidate what reporting we used to do into users just being able to pull that out of our tool. So a one-stop shop, which is huge. I mean, we had issues in several different locations. It was a really, really large undertaking. I don't think last year I would have thought we'd be where we are today. So I feel like that was a very big win for us.
In terms of the number of applications and the number of users.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Bigger.
So we've also implemented the compliance module and getting those guys up and running. We put in the audit module and are still working with them to get that to where we want it to be. We've done a lot of growing through that and getting that through to the issue management module. We continue to expand our roadmap and change our roadmap, which is something I did not anticipate last year. I thought, hey, Brenda, here's our roadmap.
That's it.
We'll see you next year, and we'll talk about how great it went. While it has been what I would call a successful implementation so far, we've learned so much about timing and what we think you should do and when, and also, having to make those changes because your user community may not be ready for it. They may be, clamoring for something else besides what you think is the right thing to do. So, I would say that we've had a number of successes, and we've also done a lot of self-evaluation along the way, which has gotten us to a point that I think we're all very proud of.
Good.
I think
I'm not
it's
going to
been a
let you
success.
forget third-party risk either.
Third-party risk, of course, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others too. But yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
Been a big
year
year.
of accomplishments. Congratulations on that. And just the team that's been built here as well. Yeah. Okay, great. So I was going to turn next to Lizzie, who really is responsible for keeping the program going. It's kind of lights on function. And can you explain a little bit about, the program itself and why it takes a person, a dedicated resource, and that your team to manage the day-to-day of the operation?
Right, of course. So just to put things into perspective for the audience, when I joined the team in 2016, there were 4 of us. I was one of those 4. Peter was our director, and we were just a smaller shop back then. Fast forward to 2018, and we have tripled. We're 12 people, and we've kind of moved it up a level. Our management realized that we wanted to have a VP for governance, risk, and compliance, and really take that program up. And so now Peter is our VP of governance, risk, and compliance, and we now have these great 3 directors who are sitting on the stage with me, and we're going to hire another one for adoption and change. Michael has been taking that on, him and another team member, and we've just realized that we really need to build that out. So it definitely does take an army to make this work, especially at the capacity that we're running. And I think that all the directors have done a great job in collaborating. We work in open workspace, and on a daily basis, we're constantly bouncing questions off each other and trying to work through any problems that we run into.
Can I also brag for a minute, just because the executive sponsor of the project was the chief risk officer, but in addition to kind of the elevation of the risk work program head to the VP level, and I'm not saying it's the only reason for this promotion, but the chief risk officer now has become the COO of Fannie Mae, right? So she's had an amazing career progression as well for many other reasons, but initiating and really getting a big GRC program running is certainly an accomplishment for her. Yeah.
And that does lead me to our governance, because we do have 3 great executive board members who are our sponsors: our chief risk officer, our chief audit officer, and our chief compliance and ethics officer. Doug spoke this morning, and he pointed that out too. So we really do have that top-down guidance, and we need that moving forward. Definitely, we need that backing. And our number 1 governance body is an executive steering council. We call it the ESC, and all 3 of them sit on that. And what's also really important is we have from single family and multifamily, our first line in business leads of those teams. And we really get their feedback. And this is a governing body. We vote every time we meet, and we're making pretty big decisions. Also, another great thing to point out is Brenda attends those. So do a lot of other.
I take all the whipping.
So do a lot of industry consultants, because we want their feedback when we're making these big decisions and going through our journey and our roadmap. We look for all of that, and that meets monthly.
So truly, that first, second, and third line is beyond engagement, the ownership, really, of the program.
And I will say, I've seen over the past 2 years how much the governance and the team have really grown and evolved. And we've identified that we needed these new roles, and we needed 3 directors and now a 4th. And I know it's a big team, right? And a lot of other companies I've seen, and probably a lot of your organizations might not want to have such a big team, but it doesn't diminish the importance of understanding what roles and what vision you want your GRC program to accomplish, and to think about that, and to think about how your team is structured and how the governance over your program is structured, right? Because we do have a lot of business involvement, and it's grown from just a steering council over technology to really how Fannie Mae is going to manage risk and what it means to the different stakeholders and to their organizations and functions.
Thank you. Thank you. So that leads us to a question for Michael, about that stakeholder engagement, right? And how do you manage across the 3 lines of defense where everyone's measuring success in different ways, thinking about, what they get out of the GRC program? Can you talk about that engagement and stakeholder management process?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm sure everyone in the room who is working towards implementing this can understand the struggles and the challenges and the opportunities that you face when you are starting to engage with stakeholders, and kind of to bring it to Nancy's point on how your roadmap changes. Until you get boots on the ground and you start moving forward, you don't hear what they're saying. So the engagement is very key. And I know in many of the sessions that we've heard about today, there's always that key focus on that top-down, making sure that we have buy-in from senior leadership. And we absolutely do have that, where I think organizations, and we've been able to work through this, is to really break through what I've heard called, and I like this phrase, is that frozen middle, right? Everyone has either it's a group or a level in the organization where it's very hard to either communicate information down or it's hard to grab buy-in. So the way that we've tried to really push past that is we've created this pod system. Now, if you were in yesterday's session and heard Peter Bannister talk, he described a little bit about that pod structure. So basically what it is, we've acknowledged as a program team that we are not the experts on Fannie Mae, right? We get the governance, we get the technology, but we don't know exactly how that is going to impact our key stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So in order to engage them, we've set up these pods. We have 8 of them, and it essentially comprises the entire enterprise. So we have, single family, multifamily, internal audit, and ERM. We have all these various groups. And what we've done, so like single family, for example, is we've brought about 10 people together from single family first line, single family second line, ERM, and we've also included internal audit. So this group really is the vehicle for adoption within their space, and they truly are, in many ways, a part of our program. Because to the extent that we can, it can't be perceived as a push to the business. It needs to be a pull. And so these are the individuals that are helping really drive that. And whether that be helping us with training or vetting governance documents, whatever it is, we really do rely on them quite a bit to make sure that we are breaking down those barriers and that we're really building that for them and with them.
So it's more than just evangelism. You're saying they really have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Right? In making sure that, whatever their business counterparts are supposed to do in the system, whether it's related to third-party management or risk assessment, that it's getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the extent that we can, we lean on them for the actual education of their people. Mm-hmm. When we first kind of started and I joined the team, and my role was, I was with Lizzie when we were a small team, we were doing this training and education, and it was really, myself, Peter, and some team members talking to different stakeholders and trying to push down the message. We came to realize that the message shouldn't be coming from us, right? Mm-hmm. It needs to be coming from those people. So to the extent that we can step out of that role of speaking to those stakeholders, we're much more effective in driving that change. I mean, just tomorrow, for example, we have a risk identification workshop with about 40 people from the multifamily organization. And I'm going to be there and help facilitate that, but it's actually being driven by several of those multifamily pod members. And it's much more well-received when it's from them.
Maris, do you want to comment on, just like an industry perspective on, the amount of change that's being managed? It's enormous, right? So.
I'm very proud of this project and of this team here, but I really do think that they've been innovative, right? Like Michael, I know when we first started talking about change management, we're like, we need to involve the business. And then we thought about it and we're like, who from the business? And we had to do a lot of digging. It wasn't just a matter of saying, we understand the 3 lines of defense strategy. We know that the business is critical in that. But we really had to find ways on how to communicate with them and how to speak their language. And, us risk folks, we talk about a risk taxonomy and we talk about risk categories. But really finding the ways to speak their language and to come up with examples and different types of trainings and different types of incentives. Like they use what they call beat awards to change the culture around risk management and to get people comfortable with raising their hand and saying they think they have identified an issue, whereas before it was this, people were scared to do that. And so now it's something that people are much more aware of, and, through this small team are really changing the way that people think about risk at Fannie Mae.
And it really proves it's a lot more than a system, right, being implemented. You see the variety.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mayor's just touched on a point just real quick on that communication piece. And I really think that the infrastructure that we've created with the pods, and we have different FLIB meetings, their first line of business risk team meetings, our executive steering council, all of these things really allow for our effective communications. And so we've had to be innovative and make sure that we are constantly pushing down a message to those individuals. We have a weekly brief. We have bi-weekly meetings with those pods and those individuals, so it's constantly putting that message out, and the structure really helps that.
And I've heard that both days.
Right.
Is you cannot over-communicate.
Right.
Absolutely agree with that.
Right.
We think we're over-communicating, and we need more.
Right. So, Judy, it sounds like there's, hands-on the change management, the end-user adoption, but could you talk about, how the business is responding, right, and the value that we're starting to see? We talked a little bit earlier about the issue management reporting, but that's just a piece of it.
It is a piece, and it's really worth mentioning. I'm so pleased, I'm so proud with what we've been doing. People have been documenting their issues, and it just goes into the system, and what do they do with it? We've got all these manual processes. People are spending so much time having to go ahead and mine the data. We now have an ability for them to go ahead and look at a dashboard. It's the so what, it's the value add. And being able to go ahead and have a dashboard, sure, you can go ahead and mine the data, and you can go ahead and look at it to say, here are the number of issues that I have by organization or by division, but there's a so what component to it, which then takes into the level of severity for the issue, the high, medium, and low, or what the source was. And now we're going in, we're providing some metrics for them. What's the percentage of management self-identified issues against the audit issues? What's the number of management self-identified against the number of second line issues that were issued? And then against what kind of categories, the severity, the high, medium, and low. Huge response. People are really, really enjoying getting that data, and it saves them from time in doing it. The other piece that we're doing is we're taking it a step farther, and we're looking at the way in which we report to the management committee. So think about it. You've got single family reporting to the risk committee. You've got your multifamily group reporting to your risk committee, operational risk, IT risk, and it goes on. Everyone pulls the data. They spend all this time mining it. They've got different assumptions. They've got different data points for when the data gets pulled. Now there's one way. There's going to be a dashboard that's out there that says, here's how you should go ahead and look at it. So now you can go ahead and do more analysis. So it really does add value. The other place that I can see adding value is in our taxonomies. It's in our language. So it's all about the data and how it is we speak. And we've set up taxonomies. It's the foundational elements. It's organization, process, risk, and control. One way to go ahead and speak about that. And the organization has rallied around having this single repository and a way in which we can go ahead and look at that. The beauty of this is being able to go ahead now and say, take it to the so what level. And it's about our risk and control data, or these risk and control matrices. And I think Peter mentioned that yesterday. It's about rationalizing the data. And as we look at it, from being able to go ahead and take data that's coming in from the business, data that's coming in from audit, data that's coming in from maybe your IT organization, your ops risk organization, and it goes on, even compliance, now there's one way to go ahead and look at this. If I can give you an example, we just went through an exercise to go through an underwriting pilot. Right. And by that we said, so in my perspective, underwriting was easy. If I were to ask you a question what you thought underwriting was, you'd probably all come up with what I thought was the same answer. From an enterprise perspective, we had different ways to go ahead and view underwriting. But the beauty of this is that we now have one way to go ahead and think about it from a process perspective, and from a risk and control perspective, we're able to go ahead and look at the risk and controls in the same regard, all three lines of defense.
Wow. Wow, and the level of detail that Judy, you and your team Maris had to get to, to appreciate, what it means to standardize that, in that case, the underwriting process. But also, as Peter talked about yesterday, just, the risks, the controls, the control test, right? And how are they aligned, and do we need all these controls? And, the first step was rationalize, and then, still more work to do on the optimize side. But looking at, a significant investment as you think about all the processes across Fannie Mae, but, it's still, kind of out there to be rolled out, and a lot of additional benefit to be received. So great examples you've given.
And Peter tells us all the time, it's search for value proven, right? Like at some point you have to move past it's the value proposition, tell people what's coming. The work that Judy's doing really allows us to communicate, this is what you're getting out of all this work that you're doing.
Right.
And using the data, we've been able to show things like, within a certain process, you have 65% manual controls, you have 20% hybrid, and then only a few automated. And it really gives the business an opportunity to take a step back and think, are there ways that we can save time and resources by automating more, or do we have duplication in what we're either from a documentation standpoint or from an execution standpoint? But there's a lot that's gone into just the ability to be able to make an RCM. In establishing our foundational elements, and that's one of the most important and the most challenging things any company is going to face with a GRC program. So we've learned a lot, but people are using the taxonomies now.
Yes.
And they're understanding them, and they make sense, and we do have governance over changing them, but we are, as people start to use them and start to have things that they want to report on or see differently in these new committee reports, we are taking that into consideration to make it usable.
Good.
We've also been able to put into place a data quality program because everybody is using the issue management module and will be, putting in these processes and controls. So we've centralized that data quality so that we can talk to audit and say, what do you guys want to see in an issue summary or a remediation plan? Like what besides what's in our standard, what's going to make your life easier?
What level of detail?
Yeah.
Right? How much description?
Yeah, and hopefully allow us to centralize that, do that work, and then allow them one time. Yeah. So we could make it across the board. No matter the type of issue, things will look the same, and that reporting, there's less and less kind of on-top adjustments over time. So that's our goal.
Tremendous accomplishment. The idea of doing the work once, leveraging it many. The promise of GRC, but takes a lot to get there. Okay, so Margaret, just wanted to turn to you, and we've spoken a little bit about the issue management capability, and I know that in terms of the system, we're focused on upgrading from the version 6 platform to the 7. So can you talk about your approach to upgrading the issue management capability, and highlight maybe some of the lessons learned? It's not just snapping your fingers, obviously. So, what should people understand when they're talking about a software upgrade, and then all the ripple effects across the panel here as we upgrade?
Well, we're very early in the process. We're upgrading our foundational elements first because obviously that underpins everything, and then the issue management system. But I think the fact that we have an Agile execution really helps, because one of the things we're trying to do, it took us months and months for requirements gathering and configuring the system and all of that. But we're going to try very hard to, one, simplify, to take into consideration feedback that we've received. So, as we started on this process, we sent out a survey to people and said, what would you like to see in this new version? And we know that M7 is going to improve things already because of the user interface, but we really wanted to understand what some of those pain points were. Talk about lessons learned. We're going to try to stay out of the box as much as we can. We have no customizations, but we have done some configuration and extensions. So, those are a couple of the things that we're doing. So we're hoping that once they go into the system, one, it'll be easier, to upgrade it again or to bring in any new service packs. And then our users will have an easier time with the system because we've got so many users that are in, and some of them, using it on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, but let's face it, there have been some challenges. You go for broad usability, and now the guy in the first line who has to approve a policy is in the system. He's got his email notification. He's got a deadline for approving this thing. He hits the deep link, he goes into the form, but he thinks he's got all the work done, but how does he submit it? How does he get it done, right? And basic usability issues become pretty important, right?
Yep.
So
that's huge. And we learned, when we started this, we had all kinds of people involved in the working group to develop it. And so we tried to please a lot of people, and so we have certain sections that are for this group and that's for this group. And what we learned is people get really frustrated. It's like, I don't understand what this is supposed to do. If it's here, I think I'm supposed to put something in these boxes. But no, it doesn't apply to you. It's for those people over there. So trying to streamline that, we hope, will help with some of that. And then I've gotten some great ideas just in other discussions here about ways for training and things like that to help folks with some of that usability.
Well, I just want to say, your feedback is now instrumental because we realize we've made, good accomplishments in 7, but it's really not answering all the usability issues. So, Michael alluded earlier about kind of an investment in the user experience, kind of a potential wrapper around 7 that
make
would
it
be
intuitive.
Appropriate, for each application. We talk a little bit about, can we TurboTax, and make it so simple that, the guy responding and approving the policy, maybe he's just responding to some questions, either on his laptop screen or on his mobile device, right? And, and then before he knows it, he's answered all the questions, he's done, right? He's not filling out a form or trying to figure out which fields he needs to, to populate and which not, right? So we're incorporating some of those lessons learned, and you guys are going to be part of that kind of pilot group around the user experience, we call it, right?
Yeah, Nancy knows firsthand when you have someone who says, I'm supposed to submit my issue today, and this isn't working, and I don't understand this. Not a fun conversation.
No,
not a pleasant.
They come find us. Yeah, they'll come find us and do it. But yes, and Lizzie talked about our open workspace, and we have found that to be extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Margaret and I can talk about here's a little quick lesson learned, Margaret. Let's not do this again. But that's been really helpful.
Well, it's going to be very useful to we've started to look at the help desk data. Right? And so we're going to continue to mine that information to find out, what is the nature of the complaint? Was there really a defect, or was it really just a user experience issue? Was it, that they don't understand what fields they have to complete? Do they not know how to submit? Some of it's going to be resolved with training,
right.
But others, is really going to require, rethinking the design of, how data is input or how the workflow is managed, right? So that's going to be very critical, and
yeah, for sure.
We're going to be looking at that carefully. So, great. Margaret, anything else you'd add? Just about the approach to the upgrade, or how you've gotten business buy-in for that?
We're just trying to be very methodical about it. Like I said, since we've got the Agile execution, it does help because we don't have this whole long requirement document that we have to go through.
Right.
We've got it chunked out in user stories, so we can look at our user stories and we're able to say, this is something that we've worked on trying to work in, and it's now out of the box, so we don't have to do that. That was one of the big things. And actually, the way we started it was, let's look at what it is out of the box in M7, and then figure out, what do we have in our current version that we need to bring over, both to try to stay out of the box, to leverage the improvements. There are a lot of improvements that have been made in usability, not so much functionality, but usability or user interface. So that's the other thing. short of that, I'll let you know in a couple months. We're early in the process.
And also, you're really, the program has done a lot of training and education on the issue management standard. So now users are also more familiar with the governance, and they're more familiar with the terminology, and we're trying to make the tool fit the governance.
Exactly.
And they did build the governance, understanding the tool.
Yeah, that was key, working with our governance team. And, there were several times when, they wrote something a certain way, and we looked at it and we're like, no, not going to work. We'd have to, change something radically, something we're not going to do. So we worked really hard to get that governance. And this was the second version of our issue management standards, but that's a really good example. The first one, it really didn't mesh very well, and so that was a lot of our users' frustrations. And so as part of this upgrade and as part of upgrading that standard, we worked really hard together. That's a very good point.
So it raises a great point about what it requires to set up GRC, because the focus has typically been on the taxonomies, and we talked about how do we help everyone get on the same page about the language we're using, how we describe the business, the processes, the risks, the controls. We've also talked about how do we standardize how risks and controls are assessed, what's important, what's not important, what's high risk, what's low risk, right? But this issue management standard is an unappreciated area, because one of the benefits that Nancy talked about was having this centralized issue management, replacing the board report with virtual real-time information. But can you just give a little more detail about the issue management standard, because I think it's not something that most companies have yet done. It's to document, define what an issue is. What is not an issue? What's the difference between an issue and a task? And then, there may be issues identified in certain areas, like third-party management, that don't rise to the same level of importance as an issue that's stemming from, a risk assessment or, an audit. Can you talk about, like, some of this we just stumbled into, kind of, but others, were, really deliberate decisions that have been made.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, we obviously started with what are the standards that we need to accomplish our objectives. It wasn't like the tool is going to drive the standard, but there are different ways to skin a cat, right? So that's what I mean by that collaboration. But this standard, it goes through the life cycle of the issue, and that's kind of the approach that we took is, all right, let's think about what are the things that someone's going to, from a standard, and we also set up a very detailed job aid. What are the things that someone's going to need to know and going to have to consider, and the decisions that are going to have to be made when you initiate an issue, when you put in your remediation plan? It's got the do's and don'ts about that, and then we've got a job aid that expands upon that and gives the guidance. And we've even got screenshots with call-out boxes. Here's what you put here and there, and so it goes through the full life cycle. What happens when it's been remediated, and is there a validation at that point? Is there a validation required to close the issue? Do we have to? And this is where my audit background has been really helpful with this, right? But do we have to have a sustainability period to be able to know that your remediation is working effectively? So all of those things have been incorporated, and this time we even provided some guidance on what kind of testing do you need to do depending on what the severity of the issue is. Yeah. What do you need to do to really consider this to be effectively remediated? Mm-hmm. So it's covered all of those. We talk about what needs to be reported out, who does it need to be reported out to. So the hope is all things issue management can be found in these two documents, one the standard and two the job aid.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, great. So Margaret, one thing you talked about was the deployment of the applications in the version 6 and the Agile approach that was taken. Maybe Maris, you could build on that. Like, what does it mean to develop a GRC capability in an Agile way? And we throw that term around a lot. Traditional project management implementation, it might have been waterfall, where you gather all the requirements and then you know, kind of the developers go away and then they appear when they have this developed solution created. But what does it mean? You know, can you talk about the sprint cycles and, you know, kind of the immediate feedback process?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the way that we are using Agile at Fannie Mae is through a sprint cycle, and Margaret is also our Scrum Master. She's amazing. She does. I mean, she's a product owner. She's played that role, but she's really taken responsibility for the requirements development. But my team, half of my team is there supporting the requirements gathering, and so we get an understanding of what the module or the application offers as a whole. So we'll know at a high level all of the different capabilities within the application, and then we would review these with the different stakeholder groups. So if it's the compliance testing module, we have the stakeholders within compliance. For issue, it was really cross-functional. There were people from all lines of defense, all business units, so that's why it made it a bit more challenging, right? Because we had all the different stakeholders. But then we would go through the process of gathering requirements, writing user stories, refining them, and then we work very closely, like we sit right next to the MetricStream developers, and we go through the process of prioritizing the stories and selecting a certain number that they think they can develop within a 2-week sprint cycle. So throughout the cycle, they're constantly collaborating, sharing the work. We have a tester, a dedicated tester, and an automated test resource so that they're writing the tests for regression testing and for the UAT throughout this sprint cycle, and it's pretty fast-paced. It goes by. I mean, you start a sprint on a Wednesday and it ends the next Tuesday, and you're amazed at what can be accomplished. And so we've done that for all the modules. I think we have adapted our approach a bit, and we want to make sure that we are thoughtful in how we're using the working groups and using the business's time and resources. So it's evolved. I think it's the only way to do it, personally.
I will say we're not fully agile in that, you know, we don't do a sprint and release it. We do it module by module, and then we have, you know, some maintenance work that we do. But we do sprint by sprint, and then we kind of hold all that work, and when we're ready, say, to roll out issue management, or, you know, we've got 7 out right now, we've got a couple more that are going to be going in, then we push all that code, we go ahead and do a release. And then in addition to that, we have a monthly release where we're putting in, you know, if there's a defect, something that needs to be fixed, enhancement, we try very hard not to put something in unless it really needs to be in, but we've got sort of this whole process around that, which helps us to be more agile, because we're able to sort of course correct and make changes that we need to make.
It's a fine balance, right? Between we have this really long strategic roadmap, and then we have these 2-week sprint cycles, but we have to do it that way so we know what the dependencies are. Everybody knows what's going to go into each release, and we have to know, you know, if we're going to be pushing issue management out, then we need to have done X, Y, and Z training, and people need to know that it's coming to them soon. And so we have built out our roadmap, and it's one of the most important things that we have as a program.
Yeah, and where you have flexibility, it also is very, I mean, you have to stay on top of it, because it's an engine that you have to feed, because you have to have 2 weeks worth of work all the time, you know, otherwise you're going to have developers lying idle, and so you have to figure out what's going to go in and when and how.
Good point, good point. Okay, so we've covered, you know, from the highly technical, really, Michael, like almost the psychological, you know, kind of ways that you have to manage the program. So we're scanning for hands. Great, okay, so we're coming over with microphones, but we'd love to take your questions. It's like, wait a minute.
I was going to say, I know that voice.
You're not allowed to ask us a question.
My point about that we have seen a question come out about the difficulties we So when you are really talking about first line business units managing their management self-identified issues, it's not their day job, basically, issues management, etc. If I really look at the workflow that MetricStream has put together, excellent workflow it has got. I'm comparing this with BWise, right, where I have that experience with BWise as well. But for someone whose day job is not doing this on a routine, regular basis, the adoption of the workflow might be complicated without sufficient training. Unless you invest a lot into that one, it is really gets tough, right? So I'm sure you would have heard this kind of feedback back from the panel under the MetricStream this morning, and we talked about all those cool things about continuous monitoring, artificial intelligence, but please keep in mind about the bread and butter of the GRC tool, so that you can also take the first line perspective. Maybe there is an easier workflow for first line people whose daily job is not issues.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the lessons learned, like Judy and Margaret are thinking about these things as we upgrade from 6 to 7, and perhaps some of that process or workflow that may have replicated a manual process before may not be necessary. So I think, big story shortened, you're going to see a simplification overall, or that's perhaps where we're going, but great feedback and understood. Yep. Any other questions? Yep, I see a hand in the back. Morteza's coming.
Sorry, name's Arvind Sean from PTCC. So I've got actually a couple of questions. The first one is more around the timing of your sort of GRC journey. What does your roadmap look like? How far does it go? What's your average time to kind of stand up a module, right, from start to end? I think somebody mentioned the internal audit module is still kind of work in progress, so what's the timeline for that? And the second question is kind of more specific to the reporting and dashboards. Are you using the functionality out of the box from MetricStream? Are you using another tool to kind of enable self-service reporting for your users? What does that look like? So appreciate any insights.
Maybe Lizzie, do you want to just talk about the roadmap and how long it goes out, and then we can maybe touch on the length for each of the modules?
Sure. So our roadmap, we have a very comprehensive roadmap. It's in an Excel form, and it's pretty much, it has our governance pieces included. It has our foundational data, which is what Judy's working on. It has the tool implementation, so every module, every application that we plan on implementing is in there. And we also, of course, have the user adoption and the training part of it as well. So when you see that in one big picture, you really realize, that training has to come way before we push out this one application or this one module. So it's nice to see that whole big picture, and we're going to need to put this foundational element, this data in before we, go and take all these other steps with the technology. So that's really great. And I think if you asked us this a year ago, we'd say, we're wrapping up at the end of this year. But we've realized that we're definitely going to go well into 2019 and push it, further out into, I'd say, 2020, 2021, because we're going to need to build out those risk and control matrices, and we're going to have to work with the first line, and that we've realized that's going to take some time, and that's really what internal audit needs to do their auditing. So we're working on that.
So I think another piece that's important is that it's not a one and done. You don't just go ahead and document a roadmap and then put it on the shelf and then just look at the picture. It's something that has to be looked at all the time, and so part of our protocol is that we actually do look at it, and we look at it all the time, but we at least review it monthly to make sure that it is in check, and if something changes, we're fluid enough to be able to go ahead and say, here are the give and takes, or here's how we have to go ahead and prioritize.
Yeah, we have many versions, and we have a change control log, so we're keeping track of where we started and all the different changes that are happening and what the current state is and where we hope to be in our roadmap.
And the nice thing is, I think it's a nice thing. We used to say, if we build it, they will come. So we get calls weekly. Margaret and I get calls weekly about, hey, we'd like to take a look at your tool. We've heard good things about it. Maybe we could use this module. So that's definitely happening more and more, which is a very good thing.
You and Peter used to laugh at me when I tell you that
we
your problem will become demand management, but it has become demand management.
It has become that.
But
right?
that's just testimony to the brilliant work here. So again, just going back to how we opened, enterprise software needs care and feeding, right? And it's data that's more complicated than the financial data, in your general ledger. This is about, how the business is run, right? And the risks and control environment that, your management ultimately finds acceptable for the performance and risk goals that you've set. So I just want to give you guys deserve a huge round of applause and, continued success. And next year, when we're hopefully up here again on stage and we're talking about, is kind of the question I didn't get in, but maybe we'll write a little paper, once this is established, all of you, what is that vision, right? It's definitely a program that will continue, but, where are we going with this from an analytics, a business decision making, maybe artificial intelligence. I know we've talked to people at the organization about robotics and other types of automated business rule processing. So an exciting future of automation here that GRC really lays the groundwork for. So well done, and thank you, and thanks for your questions and for spending the time.
Thank you.